With a strong tide, we soon reached Cuxhaven. Davis's plan was to explore the sandbanks between the Scharhörn and Cuxhaven, to find the channels and put them on his charts. Soon I realized that banks of yellow and brown sand were appearing to the west of us. Davis was looking delighted as we left the main channel and sailed westwards, straight for the sandbanks. "Centreboard up!" he cried. "Now for some real sailing." We were in an extremely narrow channel. While I measured the depth of the water with the lead line and called out the meters, Davis steered, pulled in the sails, and kept an eye on the chart. But in spite of our carefulness, there was a bumping sound from below, and we ran aground. "There's nothing to worry about," Davis said cheerfully. "When the tide rises, we'll float off the sandbank. This is a good moment to have lunch." When we went back on deck, it was low tide, and the yacht was sitting on the top of a sandbank. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing but sand, broken here and there by the winding path of a channel. Some of these channels still held water, but others had dried out completely. Under a dull grey sky, the wind blew across this wide, empty space, crying softly like a child in pain. It seemed the saddest, loneliest place on earth. Davis, however, had climbed the mast and was examining the sand enthusiastically. His face shone with pleasure. I had never seen him look happier. "There!" he cried. "You see what I mean? Have you ever seen anything like this?" He climbed down and then jumped down onto the sandbank. "Come on," he called. "The only way to understand a place like this is to explore it at low tide." I joined him, and together we ran over the sandbanks as fast as our heavy rubber boots would let us. Davis noted down every post or marker and every bend in the channels on his chart. "Right," he said when he had finished. "Now let's get back to the Dulcibella. This tide's rising fast." We turned and ran for the yacht. I was thankful to reach it in time before the sands were completely covered by the incoming tide. I stood on deck and watched the sea making its way across the desert of sand. Under my feet, the Dulcibella gave a jump, paused, gave another jump, and was suddenly floating again on the grey waters, which now hid the wide area of sand where Davis and I had just walked. We raised the sail and set off, following the channel we had just explored. All around us stretched the sea, with nothing to show where the channel was. I felt completely lost, but Davis was his usual confident self. He made me call out the depth of water every few seconds, while he steered carefully, feeling for the edge of the sandbank. It was getting dark. The German coast had already disappeared, and the sea all around us looked exactly the same to me. But I knew that Davis carried a picture in his head of the complicated pattern of the sands around and beneath us, which he had already charted. "Right, let go the anchor," he said at last, "and lower the sails." "Where are we?" I asked. "In the shelter of the Hohenhörn, in the channel where Bartels took me that night. If you listen, you can hear the waves breaking on the Hohenhörn where I went aground." And sure enough, we could hear the waves crashing on the sandbank. As darkness fell, the wind grew fiercer and the sea rougher. This was the first time we had anchored at night out of sight of land, and I found it a frightening experience as the Dulcibella rolled from side to side and the sea thundered on the sandbank. But I knew now that Davis was a yachtsman of extraordinary skill, and if he said that we were perfectly safe, then safe we were. Nothing happened in the next 10 days to disturb us at our work. We spent all the daylight hours exploring the sandbanks and channels around Cuxhaven and marking the changes on the charts. We found nothing to explain why Dolman wanted to get rid of Davis, and nobody asked questions or tried to stop us. "I'm sure it's something to do with these channels through the sands," said Davis at last, "but nobody seems to mind our being here. The answer to the riddle must be near where I first met Dolman, at Norderney. So we left the Cuxhaven area and set sail for the Frisian Islands. Helped by a strong easterly wind, we sailed all the way without stopping. We reached the island of Vange just before dark, and ran the Dulcibella aground on the sand 100 metres from the shore. There were 3 fishing boats anchored about a kilometre from us. Davis set out on foot across the sand to get fresh water and oil, leaving me alone on the yacht. "Make sure you keep the light burning on the mast," he said as he left. "It's my only guide back to the yacht." It had been an exhausting day, and I was feeling very tired, so I lay down on the seat in the cabin. I was half asleep when I heard footsteps on the sand outside, and then a voice calling in German, "Hello there, on the yacht." I was wide awake in a second, and sat up and listened. The call came again, "Hello there, on the yacht." I did not reply. Was this, I wondered, something to do with the mystery? I heard someone climb onto the deck of the Dulcibella. Suddenly, the light on the mast went out. The visitor walked along the deck to the doorway and began to climb down the ladder into the cabin. I should have waited until he was down, but I was too eager to catch him. I jumped towards the ladder and caught hold of a leg. My unknown visitor kicked out, pulled himself free, and reached the deck, leaving me holding a boot. I rushed up on deck after him, but he was too fast for me, and I did not manage to catch him. I thought of Davis coming back with the oil and water, unable to find the yacht, so I quickly relit the mast light. When Davis returned, I told him about our visitor. "I think we're being watched," I said. "Unless he was just a thief, from one of those fishing boats perhaps." "I don't think the local Germans would steal from a yacht," replied Davis. "And they wouldn't put out the mast light. They're all seamen, and know how important it is." We discussed what to do. The charts we were using, with all our corrections and notes, were the only things anyone might want to see, so we decided to hide them and the logbook. Now, if anyone came on board, they would think we were just 2 harmless young men on an autumn sailing holiday. We sat up late looking at the chart. There were 7 islands in the German Frisian group, separated from the coast by the sands, which were mostly dry at low tide. There were small villages, just a few houses and a church on most of the islands. Norderney had the only harbour. It was quite a busy little seaside town in the summer, but it was almost empty for the rest of the year. The mainland had no large towns either, just a few small villages. Davis pointed to the row of islands on the chart. "Just look at the fine, sheltered harbour hidden between these islands and the coast. It's 50 kilometres long and 10 kilometres wide, perfect for small gunboats." "Have you noticed," I asked, "that on the mainland there's a channel or a stream leading to each of those villages on the coast? Shouldn't we explore those too?" "I don't think so," he replied. "They only lead to those tiny villages." Davis hated spending time on land. "Yes, but look," I said, pointing to the chart. "There are small harbours at Bensersiel and other villages." "So there are," said Davis. "They're probably just big enough for the local fishing boats." "Perhaps we should have a look at them," I said. "Perhaps," he agreed unwillingly, "but there's a lot more real work to be done further out among the islands." We spent the next day exploring the channels around Vange Oog. There was only one of the fishing boats still there, and as we passed, I saw it was called the Cormoran. Later in the afternoon, we caught sight of a small grey naval ship moving slowly past, outside the islands. "The Blitz," said Davis, "von Brüning's ship." As it happened, we went to Bensersiel sooner than we had expected. 2 days later, a strong southwest wind began to blow, promising storms to follow. We saw that the Blitz had already taken shelter and was now anchored just south of Spiekeroog, next to several fishing boats. During the afternoon, the the wind went round to the northeast, a bad sign, Davis said, and the sky turned black, bringing violent rainstorms. We decided to shelter at Ben-Cecil and had an exciting run through the sandbanks and a very rough sea to the shore, where, with great skill, Davis managed to bring us safely into the tiny harbour. He, of course, always preferred to anchor for the night away from the shore, but I was glad to step onto dry land after more than 2 weeks at sea. Chapter 5. A Meeting and a Warning. I slept very comfortably that night, and was woken by the sound of Davis talking in his limited German to someone on the shore. When he came on board, he told me that he had met Commander von Breuning, who had invited us to have a drink in the village pub with him at 12 o'clock. Davis had another piece of news. The Cormoran is here in harbour too. It must have been them watching us, surely, and then passing the information on to von Breuning. Almost certainly von Breuning wants to know more about us, I said. We must be very careful what we say to him. Perhaps he'll come on board and ask to see our log. In that case, we must show it to him. Let's be open about it. I hate hiding things anyway. And so we decided on an important change of plan. To bring our log and charts out of their hiding place and be as honest as we could. But just how much did von Breuning know? Did he know that we had not fired a shot at a single duck in the North Sea, and that we had explored the sands all along the coast? Did he know about Dolman's attempt to get rid of Davis, and Davis's lucky escape? We could not tell. So it would be safer to tell the truth as far as possible in the coming interview. But first, we tried to find out something about the Cormoran. So, after breakfast, we went for a walk round the village. The people were very friendly, and we stopped to talk to 2 of the fishermen. We asked them about the boats in the harbour, and they told us that the Cormoran was not a local fishing boat. "She's from Memer," they said. "She's trying to raise an old French ship loaded with gold that sank off Juist. Her captain, Herr Grimm, is in charge of the work. That's him over there." They pointed to a man standing on the bridge across the little stream that ran into the harbour. We walked out onto the sand to inspect this channel, and then walked slowly back. "Don't forget," I said, "when we talk to von Breuning, just be yourself. You need only tell one lie about the trick Dolman played you." "All right. I'll leave you to do most of the talking. Look, there's Grimm again. Look at his boots as we pass him." When we did, we saw that Grimm was wearing shoes, though of course that did not prove he had left one of his boots on the Dulcibella. It was a few minutes after 12 when we entered the village pub. Davis introduced me to Commander von Breuning, and we sat down and ordered something to drink. I must say I liked von Breuning as soon as I saw him. He was tall, with fair hair and a short beard. His eyes were blue and friendly, but extremely intelligent. I was glad we had decided to tell the truth. The commander was not a man you could trick easily. We had decided that Davis should ask immediately about Dolman, his supposed friend. I was horrified to see Davis's face go pink as he asked his question in German. But then I remembered an obvious reason for his embarrassment. I had to make sure, however, that von Breuning also understood the reason for the embarrassment. "He's still away," replied von Breuning, "but his yacht is back at Norderney. His daughter must be there too." "She's a very fine boat," said Davis, his face getting even redder. Von Breuning smiled, looking thoughtfully at Davis. I saw chance and took it piteously. "Oh, good. We can call on Fräulein Dolman," I said to Davis, smiling meaningfully at von Breuning at the same time. Davis looked even more miserable. "But you have seen Herr Dolman since I have, surely," said von Breuning. "Didn't you sail to the Elbe with him?" "Only part of the way," replied Davis. "The Medusa was too fast for me." "Oh, yes, I remember," said von Breuning.
The weather was very bad that day. I thought you would have trouble round the Scharhorn."
"We didn't go round the Scharhorn," said Davis. "Dolman showed me a shortcut through the sands, but I lost him and ran aground."
"Where was this?"
asked von Breuning. "On the Hohenhörn," said Davis simply. The commander's smile disappeared, and his eyes opened wide. His surprise was so obvious that I was sure he had heard nothing of this before.
"You mean Dolman took you through the Telte Channel in that sort of weather, and you ran aground on the Hohenhörn? Is that where you lost him?"
"No, he had already disappeared in the rain," replied Davis. "He couldn't have seen what happened. Anyway, it didn't matter. The tide was rising, and I soon floated off, but I decided to spend the night in the shelter of the sandbank."
"Didn't they wait for you at the ship canal?" asked von Breuning.
"I didn't go that way," Davis replied. "The wind was against it. So I sailed to the Ida River and onto the Baltic that way."
Commander von Breuning laughed suddenly and turned to me. "Really," he said, "your friend amuses me. He has the most terrifying adventures and makes them sound perfectly ordinary."
"That's nothing to him," I said. "He prefers it. He anchored us the other day behind the Hohenhörn in a horrible wind. Said it was safer than a harbour and much cleaner."
"I'm surprised he didn't decide this storm was just the wind he needed to sail to England," said von Breuning.
"There was no pilot to follow, you see," I said with a smile.
"And no pretty daughter," laughed the commander.
Davis frowned and looked so angry with me that I decided to say no more about Dolman's daughter. I suddenly thought that if Grimm was working with von Breuning, the commander would know about the Dulcibella's nighttime visitor. It would seem strange if we said nothing about it. So I said, "By the way, I thought the local people were honest, but we had a thief on the yacht the other night."
"Really?" he replied. "They're excellent people, but in the old days they used to take things from wrecks on this coast, so it's a way of life for them. They probably thought the Dulcibella was deserted."
"Talking about wrecks," I said, "isn't there one round here that's supposed to be full of French gold? Is that true?"
"Quite true," said von Breuning. "The Corinne. She sank in 1811 off the island of Juist, with gold on board to pay Napoleon's army. In English money it would be worth about £1.5 million.
"Has anyone found it?" I asked.
"They found the wreck years ago, but it had broken up, and the gold, being heavy, had sunk to the bottom. Several people have tried to find it, but of course these sands keep moving all the time, so it's very difficult. Now a local company is trying. They're working from Memer, an island near here. Herr Dolman is one of the directors of the company. There's an engineer from Bremen involved, too. He comes from time to time."
"And have they had any luck?" I asked.
"Not yet, but I hope they will. I've put a little money into the company myself."
"Oh dear," I said. "I hope I haven't been asking too many questions."
"Not at all," von Breuning laughed. "It's no secret. Everyone on these islands knows all about it."
The conversation continued, and he went on to find out from us, in the most natural yet skilful way, every detail of our exploration so far. As we talked, I was glad we had decided on telling the truth as far as possible, and gladder still that Davis was the man he was, eager, sincere, and completely believable.
"You speak very good German, Herr Carruthers," said von Breuning at one point in the conversation.
"I've spent some time studying in Germany," I replied.
"For your profession?" he asked.
"Yes," I replied. "I work in the Foreign Office." I would have preferred not to have given him that information, but there was probably a letter from my boss with a Foreign Office stamp waiting for me at Norderney Post Office. My name was known, and we were watched, so the letter might be opened.
"When do you have to be back at work?" he asked.
"Next week, but I'm hoping my boss will agree to give me a little more time," I said. "I've asked him to write to me at Norderney."
"I see. And Herr Davis?"
"Oh, he's a free man," I said. "He'll sail around these islands until Christmas, I expect.
so we're in no hurry." "I like this coast," said Davis, "and we want to shoot some ducks." "You'll never find them," said von Breuning, "without a local man to guide you. I can easily find you a good man." "It's very kind of you, Commander," I said, "but we'd better get to Norderney first, to collect my post and see if I can stay longer or not." "I'll be at Norderney myself very soon. Come and visit me there, will you? I'd like to show you the Blitz." "Thanks very much," Davis and I said together, as warmly as we could manage. As we were leaving, von Breuning took me on one side. "One word in private with you, Herr Carruthers," he said quietly. "It's about the Dolmans. You know how your friend feels. I wouldn't encourage him if I were you. Herr Dolman came here 3 years ago, but we know very little about him or his background." "I thought the Dolmans were friends of yours," I said. "I know them, but I know everybody. I speak only as someone who wishes your friend well, you understand. I think you should forget about calling on the family in Norderney. That's all. Just a warning." He gave me a long, serious look, and I could see that he was not going to say any more. "Thanks. I'll remember," I said. The questions in my mind were, how much do you know, and what do you mean? But I could not ask them. Davis and I walked back to the yacht in silence and went down to the cabin. "Where exactly is Mémère?" I asked. Davis unrolled the chart and pointed at it. Then he threw himself on one of the seats, where he lay for some time, deep in thought. "South of the island of Juist, and running right up to the mouth of the river Ems, there is a large sandbank. Its western edge remains uncovered at high tide, forming a small island about 3 kilometers long, and from 200 to 500 meters wide. This island is Mémère." The chart showed only one building, which I guessed was the centre for Dolman's company. The island stands on the deep-water channel of the Ems, providing a shelter for ships to anchor, even at low tide. I thought hard about our conversation with von Breuning. Was he giving friendly advice to 2 young men on holiday, or a serious warning to 2 foreign spies? Perhaps he could not decide which we were. I was sure von Breuning had not known about Dolman's attempt to kill Davis. He had guessed it, of course, when Davis told him about the shortcut through the Telta Channel. The story of the French wreck and its gold provided a very good reason for Dolman, Grimm, and von Breuning to be seen together, and to spend time on Mémère, especially as von Breuning had put money into the company. I was curious about Mémère. The more I thought about it, the more I believed that it might help us to solve the riddle. Davis had still not spoken. He was annoyed with me, and I knew why. But I was annoyed with him, too. There was an important piece of the puzzle that he had not told me about. I was waiting for him to speak first, but, in the end, his silence was too much for me, and I had to break it. "Look, Davis," I said, "I'm sorry I mentioned you and Fräulein Dolman." No answer. I tried again. "I couldn't help it, you know." At last Davis spoke. "I don't know why you had to tell von Breuning everything. I just don't understand it." "You're being very unreasonable," I replied. "We agreed the best thing to do was to tell the truth. Didn't you see that he was trying to trap us?" "We can't explore the channels here any more," he said. "No, but we could go to Mémère," I said. "There's nothing at Mémère," said Davis, "or von Breuning wouldn't have told us so much about it." "Well, we've got to go to Norderney," I began, but Davis interrupted me. "And why did you have to talk about Fräulein Dolman?" At last we had reached the heart of the matter. "You haven't been fair with me, have you?" I asked. "There's something about her you haven't told me." "I know I haven't," said Davis quietly. "Well, you see, I had to talk about her, for 2 reasons. First, you seemed very embarrassed when we were talking about the Dolmans, and second, although you described Dolman's shortcut very well, in the way we had agreed,
It was still obvious that he had treated you badly. So why would you still feel friendly towards him? Why would you want to see him again? Your feeling for her explains everything, you see? Why you were embarrassed, and why you want to see the Dolmans again. I find it very difficult to talk about things like this, said Davis without looking at me. I should have told you before, but I couldn't. The truth is, I do like Clara, very much, and I think she likes me too. Our eyes met for a second, in which all was said that needed to be said. But I'm sure she knows nothing about what her father's doing, he continued. I'm sure she's got nothing to do with it. And I hoped we could avoid bringing her into it. Are you really sure? I asked. Don't you think she could be part of it? After all, you told me she encouraged you to follow them to Cuxhaven. Carruthers, said Davis seriously, I realize you're trying to help, but I know she's completely innocent. I just know it. We mustn't involve her. Very well, I replied. In that case, the best thing we can do is to forget the whole thing and sail for England tonight. No, cried Davis. We can't do that. My God, we can't let Dolman carry on. He's a traitor, working for the Germans, against his own country. All right, I said. I agree with you. We must go on with it. But we can't do so without involving her. Are you quite sure we can't? He asked. Of course we can't, I replied. We've got to see him again. We've got to see both of them, in fact. And we must be friendly. You must tell the story you told today and hope he believes it. Even if he doesn't, he won't dare say so, and we still have chances. And we must be friendly with them both. Davis said nothing, but his face showed great pain. In the time we had been together, I had come to know Davis very well, and to understand how his honest mind worked. His strongest feeling was a deep love for his country, and a wish to serve her in any way he could. Now he had been given an unexpected chance to do something really important for his country, something that only he could do. But at the same time, he loved Clara Dolman, the daughter of a suspected traitor. It seemed that he could not take his great chance without hurting the woman he loved. It was a terrible position to be in. Are you sure you wouldn't rather leave it and sail for England tonight? I asked gently. Davis didn't hesitate. We can't do that. Perhaps there's some way we can stop Dolman without involving her. If not, it can't be helped. We must go on with it. We discussed Mémère for some time. I felt sure that the search for the Kareem's gold was a way of hiding what was really happening on Mémère. But Davis disagreed. He still felt that the channels through the sands held the answer to the riddle. In the end, we decided that we would sail next day to Norderney, and we would make the next plan when we got there. Chapter 6. A Young Lady and a Book. We left Ben Cecile the next morning, but the wind had dropped, just when we needed it most. And sometimes we did not seem to be moving at all, but were just rolling from side to side. In the distance we saw the Blitz, travelling rapidly westwards, and I felt sure the Cormoran would also be on her way to Norderney. I was desperately impatient to get on, but it took us most of the day to reach Langeoog, and we anchored that night near Baltrum in a thick white fog. The next morning we continued our painfully slow journey, and in the afternoon I heard Davis shout at last, "There's Norderney!" I looked up and saw, through the mist, a group of grassy sandhills, exactly like 100 others I'd seen recently, but of much greater interest to me. I was busy with the lead line, as we were in shallow water, when Davis suddenly said, "Is that a boat ahead?" "The Cormoran, do you think?" I asked, noticing what looked like a fishing boat in the distance. Davis said nothing, and seemed to forget that he was steering the boat. We touched the sandbank, but luckily the tide pushed us away again. His next words surprised me. "Let go the anchor. Lower the sail." When I had done this, Davis was still staring into the mist through his binoculars, and, to my astonishment, I noticed that his hands were trembling violently. I had never seen this happen before, even at moments of great danger. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Are you cold?" "That little boat," he said. "It's her, I'm sure. It's the Medusa's dinghy. She's come to meet us." He pushed the binoculars into my hand, and I saw a pretty little white sail coming closer. I kept my eyes on the boat, as I did not want to look at Davis. At last I heard him draw a deep breath. He turned to the Dulcibella's dinghy. "You come too," he offered, jumping in and picking up the oars. "I'd rather stay. I'll tidy up the cabin." "Carruthers," said Davis, "if she comes aboard, please remember she's outside this business. There are no clues to be got from her." "I'll keep out of it this time," I said. "You do and say what you like." He rowed away, just as he was, with unbrushed hair and in his old sailing clothes. I watched the two boats getting closer in the mist, and heard a great splashing of oars. Finally, I saw the boats being pulled up on a sandbank, and then two figures walking rapidly to meet each other. And then I thought it was time to go below to tidy the cabin. Nothing on earth could have made the Dulcibella's cabin a suitable place to receive a lady, but I did my best, putting clothes away in cupboards, a clean cloth on the table, and books back on the shelf. I had just put water on to boil for tea when I heard the dinghy return. I went up on deck and found Davis with a very pretty girl, about 19 years old. She was wearing a thick jacket, dark skirt and rubber boots, and her rose-brown skin lent a delicious touch of colour to the greyness of the sea and sky. When she looked at me and spoke, I knew immediately that she was no Fräulein Dollmann, but as English as I was, although she must have spoken German ever since she was a child. She looked eagerly round the yacht, asking questions about all she saw, but it was obvious that she was more interested in Davis himself. The way she looked at him, and the way he looked at her, made me feel sorry for myself because I was not in love, and even sorrier for Davis because I could not see how all this would end. One thing was clear, however: she could never have been involved in her father's attempt to kill Davis. "How did you manage alone that day?" she asked him suddenly. "You know, on the way to Cuxhaven." "Oh, it was quite safe," replied Davis, "but it's much better to have a friend." She looked at me and, well, I was suddenly extremely proud to be Davis's friend. "Father said you'd be safe," she said. We went below into the cabin, where the water was just beginning to boil. Miss Dolman was in a light-hearted mood, laughing and joking about all our little domestic arrangements. "You will stop at Norderney?" she asked us. I looked at Davis. It was up to him, but I need not have doubted him. There was no hesitation in his reply. "Yes, of course we shall. I'd like to see your father again." "Yes," she said anxiously. "Yes, I'm sure he will be glad to see you." She did not sound at all certain. "He'll be back tomorrow. You know, we aren't living on the Medusa at the moment, but in our house on Norderney. My stepmother is there too." She gave Davis the address, a little unwillingly, it seemed to me. The difficult moment passed, and a warm and friendly feeling returned to the cabin as the three of us sat down to enjoy our tea together. But that pleasant event never took place, all because of an English name in gold-painted letters on the cover of an old book on our bookshelf. The disaster came and went so quickly that at the time I had no idea what caused it. One moment our visitor was laughing and talking to Davis while looking through some of our books. Then suddenly there was an awful silence, and I turned round from making the tea. She was sitting quite still, with eyes wide open, and a very white, frightened face. After a few seconds, she managed to speak. "How late it is! I really must go. My boat won't be safe." She got up from the table. "What's the matter?" asked Davis in English. But she did not answer, and almost ran up the ladder, like a wounded animal trying to escape. She had reached the deck and jumped into the dinghy before she realized she needed one of us to go with her and bring the boat back. "Davis can—" I began, but she interrupted me. "Oh, no, thank you. If you will be so kind, Herr Carruthers. It's your turn. I mean—" "Go on," said Davis to me in English. I jumped into the dinghy. The poor girl tried to apologize to Davis, but could not find the right words. "Goodbye," he said simply, and turned away. I offered to row, but she took no notice and rowed fast towards her sailing boat. It was now floating gently off the sandbank, where it was anchored. "Herr Carruthers," she said, "I want to say something to you." It sounded like von Breuning's warning all over again. "I made a mistake just now. It's not a good idea for you to call on us at Norderney tomorrow. My father is always busy." "We can come another day. We have several days to spare," I said. "And we have to stop at Norderney for letters anyway." "Please don't come because of us," she said. "This fine weather may not last. It would be a pity not to use it to sail to England. And my father will be too busy to see you, I know." "But we could see you, surely," I replied. No, please," she said quickly. "My father would not like it. I should not have come today. Please tell Herr Davis that he must not come near us." "He'll understand," I said. "I know he'll be very sorry, but you can always trust him to do the right thing." "Yes, I know I can," she said softly. "Goodbye. Please say goodbye to Herr Davis for me." I rowed back to the yacht, where I found Davis in the cabin. He had taken down all the books from the shelf and was staring at the one he held in his hand. "What on earth can have upset her?" I asked. "I've just realized," he said. "It was this." And he handed me the book. I had seen it before on the shelf, but never opened it. It was about sailing on the east coast of England, with all the usual details of winds and tides. "What about it?" I asked, puzzled. "Don't you see?" "She was looking at this book," said Davis. "Look at the photograph at the front." I looked. It showed a young man on the deck of a small yacht. "Well?" I still could not understand. "It's him." "Who?" "Dolman," cried Davis. "Dolman wrote it. She was upset because now we know who her father really is." I looked at the front of the book. The author was Captain X of the Royal Navy. The book had been written 16 years before. "Are you sure it's him?" I asked. "Quite sure," Davis replied. He looked again at the picture. "Yes, that's Dolman all right." So, 16 years ago he was an officer in the British Navy, and now he's working for the Germans, I said slowly. "He's about 50 now, you said, so that fits in. And the girl has been speaking German since she was a child. They must have come to Germany soon after he wrote the book. Is it a well-known book?" "I've never seen another copy," said Davis. "I bought this one for a few pence in a second-hand bookshop." "Didn't you say that Dolman visited you on the Dulcibella in September?" I asked. "Of course. He must have seen the book. Perhaps he thought I'd recognized him. That explains everything." "Does it?" I said. "Perhaps he's just someone who did something wrong, had to leave the Navy, and came here, where nobody knew him, to start a new life." "No, that's not it," said Davis. "That doesn't explain why Grimm's been watching us or why von Breuning suspects us." "What do you think of the daughter?" he added. "She's lovely, Davis," I said. "You'll be a lucky man if— Well, better not think about that for the moment. I'm sorry I ever thought badly of her. I can see she's quite innocent of any unpleasant business. Mind you, she's aware that they have a past to hide. This makes the problem much more difficult for us, doesn't it?" "Not at all," said Davis. "It just means that there are two things we must do. We must find out exactly what Dolman is doing and stop him. And we've got to make sure she doesn't suffer because of his guilt." "He's still away," I said. "Yes, I know, but she said he's coming back on the ferry from the mainland tomorrow morning. We'd better be there when he arrives." We arrived at Norderney town in the evening, and anchored on the edge of the deep-water channel, about 50 meters from the harbour entrance. We were too excited to sleep, or do anything except make plans and talk. At last, Davis's natural shyness left him, and I was able to see into the secret corners of his heart. He loved this girl, and he loved his country, and he was determined to be loyal to both of them. Somehow, a way must be found to do this. After much discussion, we realized there was only one answer: to get Dolman, secrets and all, daughter and all, away from Germany completely. This was now our goal, and we took delight in the challenge. We had no clear idea how we would reach the goal, but there were two possible ways forward. One was to continue searching the area for clues of some kind, and the other was to use this new information about Dolman to force him to tell us what was going on. By the time we went to bed, this second plan was the preferred one. Chapter 7. A Day Out in the Fog. When the ferry from the mainland arrived the next morning, we were watching it from the Dulcibella's cabin. "That's Dolman," said Davis, "the tall one with the beard." "Who's that with him?" I asked. It was a short, fat, older man, with glasses and a hard-looking, clever face. "He must be the engineer from Bremen, who von Brüning told us about. Look, there's Grimm behind him." 5 or 6 passengers got off the ferry, but Dolman and his companion stayed on the deck. They stared down at the Dulcibella as the ferry moved out of the harbour. "They haven't got off," I said. "Where are they going?" "Juist," Davis answered. "It's the only other stop." "And from Juist to Memer," I said softly. We had to go into Norderney town to buy food and milk, and to collect my post. I was surprised to find that there were 2 letters for me from my boss. The first one gave me permission to take another week's holiday. The second one, written 2 days later, and marked urgent, cancelled this permission and told me to return as arranged. I showed them to Davis. "I haven't received this second one," I said with a smile. As we made our way back to the harbour, a thick curtain of fog rolled in from the sea. "We'll never find the yacht in this fog," I said, as we climbed down to the dinghy. "Yes, we will," said Davis. "Just row straight across the harbour." He leaned over the side of the boat, feeling in the water with a stick. "There we are," he said, after a few moments. "That's the edge of the deep water channel. Now all we've got to do is follow it until we reach the Dulcibella. It couldn't be simpler." And sure enough, in 2 or 3 minutes we were back on the yacht. "That's extraordinary," I said. "How far could you go like that?" "Well," he replied, "if we had a chart and a compass, I suppose we could go anywhere." "Why not go to Memer?" I said quietly. "Memer," he said. "That's an idea. It's a long way, of course, 20 kilometers more or less." "Yes," I said eagerly, "but what a chance! Everyone's seen the Dulcibella here, including Dolman and his friends. If we could get to Memer in this fog, we might find out what's going on, and no one would see us on the way, or know we were there." Davis took down the chart and studied it. "Put some food and water in the dinghy," he said, "and an oil lamp, the compass, and the guns." "The guns?" I said. "What for?" "We're looking for ducks. If the fog clears," he smiled. "Now, just give me 10 minutes with a chart." I had got the boat ready by the time he joined me. "We'll have to hurry," he said. "We can't take the open sea route round Juist. It's too public. That's the way the ferry goes, and it's more than 25 kilometers. No, we'll have to go over the sand. It's a much shorter way, but it'll be difficult because the tide's falling, so the channels through the sandbanks will be extremely narrow and shallow. Are you sure you can row there and back?" "You steer, and I'll row all right," I said, and we set out. Even at high tide, the chart only shows narrow channels between Norderney and Memer, and in a little over 3 hours' time, it would be low tide. The fog made the sandbanks completely invisible, but Davis did not attempt to look around for buoys or marker posts. Instead, he concentrated all his attention on the chart, the compass, and his watch. My duty was to be a machine, to keep the dinghy moving in whatever direction he wanted. I pulled hard, breathing deeply and regularly, hoping I would be fit enough to manage the journey. At the shallowest point, Davis dropped the lead line into the water and measured the depth. My oar touched sand, and we were aground. I rested for a moment while Davis looked at his chart. Then we were off again, with a push from the oars on the sandbank, and I could see from Davis's shining eyes that we were in the right channel. We continued in this way, rowing and pushing through the soundless white blanket of fog. I began to lose all idea of time and place. The misty figure of Davis in front of me seemed as dreamlike and crazy as myself, and I saw strange, imaginary shapes appearing out of nowhere. It was a race against time, the fog, and the falling tide, but in the early afternoon we arrived at Mamers. In 4.5 hours I had rowed 20 kilometres, and Davis had steered us through fog and sandbanks without a single mistake. I let my tired muscles relax, and we had some whiskey, bread and cold meat while making our plans. We decided Davis would stay with the boat while I explored. I spoke the language well, and in my sea boots, sailing clothes and old hat, I could easily pass for a Frisian islander in the fog. "Take the compass, the chart, and the whistle," said Davis. "Remember the tide. You can have 1.5 hours, no more. If you can't find your way back, blow your whistle, and I'll blow mine to guide you. Good luck." The chart showed that the office building was northwest of where we had landed. "That means southeast to come back," I said to myself. I checked the compass and started up the beach. I could only see a few meters ahead of me in the fog, but I could hear noises all around me, a ship's bell, and some men calling to each other in German. Somewhere in front, a door banged. Before long, I found myself in a path, and a few moments later a wall appeared, which seemed to be the side of a building. I paused and took out my pipe and lit it to give myself an excuse for standing still and listening. I could hear a number of men's voices, so I moved away from the sound, round the corner of the building, and saw a lighted window ahead of me. It would be interesting to see into that room, I thought, so with my hat pulled well down, I walked slowly on, taking a long, careful look inside as I passed. It seemed to be an office. I could see Grimm paying a workman some money, and in chairs round the room I could see von Brüning and Dolman, and the short, older man from the ferry, who was, we learnt later, the Bremen engineer, Boomer. The room was brightly lit, and no one was looking out through the window, so I went back for a closer inspection. Bending low, I moved, as quietly as a cat, until I was beneath the window. Then, with great care, I raised my head. There was a different workman in the room now, also receiving his wages from Grimm. There were charts on the wall, and the plan of a ship. On the floor were several pieces of old wood, perhaps from the wreck itself. My heart sank. This was payday.